pleasant idea for some, for others a nightmare, the pleasure machine. 3 years ago, a comic spread across Twitter of what someone believed was our future. The comic put us face to face what could become peak humanity. What the comic means is that happiness comes from chemicals. This comic shows us an individual sitting in a chair unconscious, enjoying their life. But is it maybe plausible to be conscious while getting fed these chemicals? There are a couple of chemicals, or rather neurotransmitters, that are responsible for happiness. How they work is complicated yet beautiful. When information is received by a neuron, there is an electric impulse that triggers a release of the neurotransmitter. They move across a gap between the first and the second neuron, where they then bind around receptors. There are loads of different receptors, as there is one for every neurotransmitter. The 4 neurotransmitters of main interest are serotonin, dopamine, endorphins and oxytocin. Dopamine, the most famous neurotransmitter of all, the pleasure and reward chemical. One of the most important neurotransmitters, also one that is easily manipulated, as we later find out. Serotonin. If too little is in the body, mental health problems are a high probability. Endorphins, the natural painkiller, very alike to morphine, hence the name containing half of it. They also get released during intimate contact or eating. Oxytocin. This is important in forming social connections. Let's take a look at probable pleasure machines. In 2010, Christopher Nolan released the mind-twisting movie Inception. The highly rated movie about dreams and dream sharing is an example of people giving up their freedom to a machine. In this movie, people are able to navigate dreams and share dreams, something that is currently non-existent. Some might have experienced that sometimes you wish not to wake up from a dream, and so don't the people in this fictional world. Here, people take substances to fall in deep sleep, followed by being hooked up to a machine which initiates dream sharing. The master dreamer creates the world, and then another populates it. In the movie, it becomes clear that this practice is positive for many. They can share their creativity to no end. Sadly for them, after having shared dreams for too long, it becomes the only way you can dream, and since dreaming actually releases oxytocin, they volunteer to spend hours in such machine. The most famed example has to be The Matrix. The Matrix is a staple piece of sci-fi culture, which consisted of 3 movies. The Matrix follows Neo, as he gets a choice to choose between a red and a blue pill. He gets told by Morpheus that the blue pill will let him wake up the next morning and he can believe whatever he wants to believe life is. Yet the red pill will let him wake up in the real world. And so, Neo chooses the red pill. Neo wakes up out of a pot and gets explained he's being used as fuel by machines. Later in the first Matrix movie, we find out that there were several Matrixes, as the Matrix is called what life was to Neo before Neo went out of the pot. Yet, he was not in the first Matrix. The first one consisted of a real pleasure pot. The world was carefully constructed to make life as pleasant as possible, yet people declined this Matrix because suffering didn't exist. This is the thing that sets apart Inception and the Matrix. As in Inception, at some point the dream ends and you must return to reality. Yet, the Paradise Matrix was constructed to only indulge happiness. The reason why these 2 movies are important to understanding a plausible pleasure machine is because they revolve around the idea of a second world. In both, your physical body would be separated from the mental happiness of the brain and the body lying still. Yet, the Matrix was based on philosophy that humans not only need the happiness chemicals, but also suffering. In one of the best comedies of all time, Little Miss Sunshine, the character of Steve Carell tells us about Marcus Proust and his work. His text mostly comes from the biography How Proust Can Change Your Life by Alain de Botton. In this biography, he talks about the life and philosophy behind the work of Proust. The character of Steve Carell tells us that Proust believed the best years of his life were the ones he suffered, since he had learned the most in these years. The years he was happy? Total waste, because he didn't learn a thing. According to de Botton, his beliefs were a bit more complicated. Proust had said, "We suffer, therefore we think." This was explained by de Botton as how Proust meant it, that a thought without suffering lacks with motivation. He explains, you can acquire wisdom painlessly via a teacher or painfully via life. This line is the first example of philosophers thinking suffering is the backbone of society, since without it, pleasure ceases to exist according to them. Proust was not the only philosopher to rank suffering higher than happiness. Another philosopher whose presence is shown in Little Miss Sunshine is Nietzsche. To simplify his beliefs, a person is made out of 2 parts, creativity and the body. The body must suffer for creativity to blossom. Nietzsche was one against non-suffering, finding it plausibly more important than pleasure. He thought life would be meaningless without suffering, making the idea of a pleasure machine probably an insult to his existence. Yet what I possibly in a future video wish to go in depth more speaks to the ideology of Nietzsche. I believe his ideas were time constrained, and explaining his ideas in 2022 is wrong. In our current day and age, suffering is non-existent for the body for most. Only in a gym or boxing people suffer with their body. There is no war to be fought by hand, as we have bombs now, and old guns are not very sufficient in war. But they were when Nietzsche was alive, thus saying in our current day that the body must suffer for creativity to blossom is believed by mostly men that believe men are losing their manliness. Personally, I believe everything gets redefined by time, yet in recent years men have blamed others for losing their so-called masculinity. As said in Fight Club, we're the middle children of
history, man. No purpose or place. We have no Great War, no Great Depression. Our Great War is a spiritual war. Our Great Depression is our lives.
Despite Fight Club being a satire, it does somewhat represent a part of how some people think in 2022. Some people believe they can fight themselves in what Tyler Durden says, to having no purpose as they were when wars were being deemed normal. Suffering for the body for many people has been deemed a choice, not necessary anymore as when they were wars. Thus, my belief shortened in a few words, Nietzsche lived in a different time and his ideas aren't as relevant in 2022, as the world has changed. Proust is exempted from this since he believed he had to mentally suffer. Like already said, I wish to go further into this topic in a future video. Well, if the pleasure machine would exist in a way of putting us into unconsciousness, then there is no reason for creativity or learning. Yet then Nietzsche would be right in saying life would be meaningless without suffering, since life would be unconsciousness. These examples put into question what would be an ideal pleasure machine. Would you have to be unconscious forever as in the Matrix, or dream from time to time as in Inception? So then what did the person do in the comic? Was she dreaming from the machine in the Inception? Did she go into Paradise Matrix, a second society? Or did she just do nothing and feel happy? If a machine could give us chemicals, why can we not? We can. Is a popular addictive substance that 3/4 of people who use it also become addicted. The substance is also considered a downer, opposed to many other popular substances, which are stimulants. Most other popular substances also interact with dopamine, but as they are stimulants, they have a different effect, and as I tried to find the pleasure machine as described in this comic, one has to be relaxed, and that is what does. Take a look at retellings of people's experiences in pop culture, mostly in movies. Two popular ones are Christiana F. and Beautiful Boy. Both are based on a book. In both, the protagonist is depicted as if they are in their own world, isolated from whatever is going on, as if they sit in a chair in the comic book. So why is this illegal? More on that later. Another plausible pleasure machine is one converted into the internet, the algorithm, especially in the form of TikTok. A burden, some might say. TikTok has shown to have a negative impact towards young people. Their attention span is being reduced to mere seconds and they have no interest anymore in others. Yet somehow I consider this close to a pleasure machine. Yet I feel obligated to say it's not good for the human brain. The constant income of enjoyable content being constructed by an algorithm beyond human understanding is addictive and hard to reject once acclimatized to you. Once it is acclimatized to your needs, it creates a constant influx of dopamine. Every 10 seconds there is a new video, a miss or a hit. TikTok is a slot machine but personalized. Hours are easily being spent on TikTok as it creates a tunnel vision that also exists when you interact with a slot machine. The algorithm reads what you like and what you don't. Hours of use is being rewarded by a personalized feed, thus hitting the jackpot more and more, and then dopamine gets released more and more. TikTok is way more healthy than the previous pleasure machine, and also legal for now. Now, slowly drifting to the end, not sure what a pleasure machine is supposed to be, I tell the information I withdrew about neurotransmitters. Every upside has its downside, and with the happiness chemicals there are many. Only at controllable levels these chemicals are healthy, and in higher doses it becomes unhealthy. Thus, the rush of dopamine is not what the pleasure machine can successfully succeed in without having the downside that any other substance already has. Meaning, a pleasure machine is unable to exist if a human lives a normal life. So, the pleasure machine has to be a machine which puts you into unconsciousness while getting fed the 4 happiness chemicals for the rest of your lives with no breaks. What I'm trying to say is that in our current society, pleasure machines are highly addictive and bad for our mental health, with no change upcoming ever. And the only way to undergo a real pleasure machine is to stop living. The thing is that all current pleasure machines are heavily addictive, since the body doesn't get the same rush from other things anymore. This is why heavy use of either of the real life pleasure machines can lead into depression when sober. With TikTok, research is actually shown that if you come over as depressed to the TikTok algorithm, it changes your feed to show you more depressed videos, sending you down a downward spiral that it all started with downloading the app in the first place. Another example is any substance that gives off dopamine, since nothing else than the substance gives off the same amount of dopamine. Thus, to even feel happy, you need to take any substance. I must say, in the case of substances, there are many more variables at play to addiction. Yet, in both examples, any other tests become dull due to the fact they don't deliver dopamine as good. Thus, they live in a world where their suffering can be made non-existent by their dopamine deliveries, which then, according to the philosophers discussed earlier, makes people with dopamine rush less able to be creative and learn. When under the substance, yet whenever sober, they are supposed to drive in creativity and productivity, but that's wrong because addiction gets in the way of them being able to feel properly productive. Both examples of a real pleasure machine mostly activates dopamine, but there are 3 other chemicals important to pleasure. Oxytocin is a chemical that gets released during social connections, best example a hug. Yet in recent years we have been further apart than ever in a physical form, yet it also gets released during talking or forming conversations. 30 years ago we lived our life in a small social circle around the town we lived in, and without the internet we were limited to going outside to form a conversation with most people. Since the World Wide Web has bonded us closer than ever, conversations with other people happen at any time of our day. On average, a person sends 90 messages a day on top of any conversations of the internet. The internet has also made calling others more plausible, as apps where you call with others like Discord have almost 130 million active users. Better said, social interaction with similar-minded people has never been easier, since the World Wide Web has made us closer than ever. Thus, oxytocin gets released easier and more compared to 30 years ago. Thus, I argue that messaging apps are something of a pleasure machine themselves, as they have made the neurotransmitter oxytocin more accessible than ever before and made our lives happier because of it. To explain that a pleasure machine will never exist as long as we keep living, the statistics of depression under teenagers tells it all. Too much of anything is bad, such is the case with neurotransmitters. Too much oxytocin can lead to depression, and so does too much dopamine. This means that the World Wide Web has programs now that are powerful enough to be a pleasure machine, yet in time it fails to giving you pleasure. What I hope you learned from this video is that heavy use of anything can lead to something negative. I wish next time you open up an app or do a substance, you think of its consequences to the brain. Anything that stimulates the happiness chemicals, such as gaming, eating, touching yourself, has to be done to an extent to stay healthy mentally.